Hello again. The story of the road to Emmaus is one of my favourite Easter stories, and I know that this is so for many other people. Perhaps it's because we more easily identify with these two rather minor disciples, one Cleopas and one other unnamed, rather than with St. Peter or St. Paul, those great leaders who are fired up with God's truth. You know, you and me were just ordinary followers of Jesus, trying to be his disciples in a confusing and sometimes hostile world, just like Cleopas and his friend were. But despite their ordinariness, Jesus had a purpose for these two. We don't know what their business was in Emmaus. Maybe they were just starting to head home, getting away from Jerusalem and the bitter memories of Christ's crucifixion. Maybe they thought themselves in danger and were fleeing. We don't know. Yet, whatever their purpose was, Jesus, as it says, himself came up and walked along with them. He revealed himself to them. And in that revelation, whatever their purpose plans were, these had to be laid aside in the presence of Jesus. Late at night though it was, with all the dangers of darkness and the road and dangers that lay ahead of them back in Jerusalem, they had to return. They had to return to spread the news. It's a very rich story. And we could explore many different aspects to it. As I've said, we could think about the way that Jesus changes the plans of these two and sends them back to Jerusalem. We've all had our plans disrupted in a big way recently with COVID. Holidays have been cancelled perhaps. Visits to friend and family have had to be put off. Work has had to be put on hold. Whatever it is, we're having to adjust to a new situation, and it certainly isn't easy to do so. Jesus sometimes takes over our plans and messes them up. He's not like COVID. He's not trying to kill us. His plans are for our good, but that does not mean any the less that adjusting to his plans and putting aside our plans is going to be that easy. We could perhaps think about how Jesus gently revealed himself to the disciples, talking through Moses and the prophets, taking these disciples and resetting their expectations as to who the Messiah was. They had hoped that the Messiah, that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel, to drive off the yoke of oppression. Jesus showed them that that was exactly who he was, but that his way of redemption came not through war, but through sacrifice, and that his great victory was not going to be over the Roman oppressors, but over the much greater oppressors of sin and death. Or we could think about the way that Jesus was present to the disciples. Not in flashes of thunder and mighty godlike power, but in the little everyday stuff of life. A walk along a road, a meal in the evening, and reflect on how even the ordinary stuff of our day can be filled with God's presence. These are all good things to ponder. But what I want to do today is to focus most on the perception of Jesus by his disciples, or maybe their lack of perception, and how they came to recognize him. And think about how that also may apply to us. You see, one of the striking things about the resurrection stories is how many of them emphasize the point that the disciples did not at first recognize the risen Christ. Cleopas and his friend didn't in this story. And John records that Mary Magdalene mistook Jesus for a gardener. She did not know it was Jesus. And if you want to read just briefly ahead in Luke's Gospel, you'll see that after the Cleopas and his friend returned to Jerusalem and met the other disciples, they even then have a tough time recognizing Jesus, who comes to them, and they are frightened, thinking they see a ghost. Somehow, for whatever reason, Christ risen did not fully disclose himself to the disciples at first. Funnily enough, this very fleeting nature of the recognition is one of those things which, for me, makes the whole resurrection story more credible. It feels authentic, like real eyewitness accounts. They're a bit confused, but they're trying to tell the facts as they occur to them. After all, if you were just making this story up, you'd probably go for something a lot more obvious and dramatic, with a few more lightning bolts thrown at it. And you would have Jesus appearing to his top disciple Peter first, not to a woman and a couple of obscure travellers on the road, wouldn't you? But no. These stories, this sense that Jesus' revelation is somewhat unclear, makes me think actually that people really saw this like this. Now, if you'd listened to last week's talk about Thomas and Christ, you'll recall we were thinking about the way how we can doubt our experience of God's presence. How, looking back, even the strongest experience of his Holy Spirit entering in us or acting in us, these can seem in retrospect to be feeble and insubstantial. This week, though, I want to see what Christ can say to us in this story about how he can be truly revealed to us. The first thing to note, of course, is that in this story, and in all the stories of the resurrection, the revelation comes at God's initiative. Jesus catches up with the disciples on their walk along the road. He enters the upper room, even though the doors are locked. He pops up on the shore with the disciples later in their return from a nighttime fishing trip. You see, the disciples would have longed to see Jesus, but they couldn't make him appear to them. No amount of prayer, fasting, or ritual incantation can bring God into our presence. He's not there at our command. He comes to us, and he seeks relationship with us. That's true. But he's not there at our beck and call. That said, there is a place for invitation. As Cleopas and his friend reach their destination, Jesus turns, and he turns to leave, He gives them the option to finish the encounter where it is. But they call him back. They urge him strongly to stay, to spend the evening with them and eat with them. God will reveal himself to us in his own good time and his own good way. But let us have open hearts to seek for that revelation, to seek for his presence and invite him in. And linked to this, let's not forget that Jesus is not always going to look or be exactly what we think he will be. As Matthew reminds us in that chilling story in chapter 25 of the sheep and the goat, Jesus can be right in front of our noses as the stranger and the outcast, and we can simply miss him or ignore him. Lord, when did we see you? Say the people who've not shown charity to the poor and the outcast. And Jesus tells them they saw him when they saw those people in front of them who they did not help. Just as Jesus can reveal himself to us in moments of shocking joy and beauty and wonder, so also his presence can disturb us. His presence can be revealed in the things that disturb us and challenge us and disrupt our plans. He will take the initiative to reveal himself. Our hearts need to be open to invite him in, whatever way he makes his presence known. I don't know if, along with these talks, you've been following Sarah's contemplations, which are also on the Church at Home site. But if you have, you'll know that last week's contemplation was on the practice called the Daily Examine, a review of the day and a prayer that the Holy Spirit would reveal to us his presence in our day that has just passed. This may be something that you do or not. And I don't want to repeat what Sarah has said, but it's based on this premise, and it's a good premise. It's based on the premise that God is there, and he is seeking to reveal himself to us. He is seeking relationship with us all the time, as we walk, as we sit, as we break bread. Most of the time, though, our preoccupations or preconceptions block him out. We are too busy to pay careful attention. Or we may be too focused on the Jesus that we think we understand and feel comfortable with to see him revealed to us in new ways. The Emmaus story reminds us that Jesus lives. He was there then, on that road, and he lives now. He wants to walk beside us. He wants to reveal himself to us and to show us his way. He wants us to invite him in. So thinking about this passage today, my prayer then is this: that in the week ahead we will indeed be open to Jesus walking with us. We will be open to seeking to recognize him. And when we do, however disturbing he may be, that we will invite him in. Because knowing that he lives, we will have joy. And we will be able to say, with Cleopas and his friend, that our hearts have burned within us. May this be your week. Amen.